Hi, hello, I'm Hal. Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to talk about all the books that I ended up reading in August. I did end up reading 8 books in total in August. 7 of these were via my library. I did actually read a book that I owned that I needed to read, and 3 of those were as audiobooks, 2 of them as ebooks, and 3 of those as physical books. So the first book that I ended up reading this month was Hammajang by Makana Yammamoto. This is like a really fun sci-fi heist story. We're in a future society on Kepler. We are following our main character Edie, who has just gotten out of prison after like 7 years because with the last big job that they worked, their like best friend slash crush betrayed them at the end of that, which was not good. Like Edie is now struggling to kind of have a normal life, is helping out with their sister and like her family, struggling to get a job, when Angel, the aforementioned best friend slash crush situation, reaches back out to them with the idea of this big heist against like, that would give them like $6 billion against stealing technology from this like really unethical billionaire type character. Very Elon Musky, I will say. There's brain chips involved. And yeah, we kind of follow as the team, the heist team, gets recruited, as they all meet, as we're starting to get more information about how this heist would work and click together, and then the actual kind of heist himself. Fun time. I do love sci-fis, I do love heist situations. I liked that it's very like Hawaiian, like Pacific Islander inspired, which is really interesting because a lot of the time in sci-fi books they just get this like homogenous, you know, American British culture on the top of them, and a lot of people lose a lot of their individuality, and this doesn't happen in this book. Like Edie and our main characters are very clearly, you know, Hawaiian. There is a pigeon that is also involved with this in the text, which whilst I think is really interesting, because I'm not too aware of how this like language works, it felt like a lot of it was written out phonetically, which like I understand why that's done, because you're trying to very much put this pigeon and this language into the language of your book, but is kind of like uncomfy, let's just say. I think there are ways of writing books in dialect and, you know, languages and stuff like that. I've read Andrea Camilleri in, you know, in Italian. It's written in Sicilian, and like that's fine. I would be uncomfortable of someone translating this and doing it with like a phonetically written Italian accent or Sicilian accent kind of thing, you know? So that's kind of where I am. It's like, I understand why it's done, but it's still not something that I adored. The other thing is like, there's a bit of a like possible third act like betrayal thing going on. It's a heist story, you know? And like, there was a real thing though where I was just like, I don't know how you, as someone who has like been involved in heists and crimes, didn't think about, especially. I felt like this was incredibly obvious to me, that I was not surprised at all by, you know, this reveal. I was like, girl, gender neutral, why did you not think about this? I liked the characters, I liked a little bit of found family, I liked the like relationship drama and stuff like that. Overall, I would say that this is like between a 2 and a 3, but definitely, you know, overall 3 stars. Reignited my love for sci-fi. I really wanted to read a lot of sci-fi this month, and then some of that ended up working out, some of that didn't, because I then had loans that were due back at the library and stuff like that. The next book that I ended up finishing was Reforged by Seth Haddon. This is a gay fantasy romance book. We're following our main character Balin, who has just recently become like prime paladin for the king, and the king, Zavrius, is also a new king that has recently been crowned. Zagreus, the king, he's like the sixth sibling in his family, and all of his brothers and sisters have recently died in suspicious circumstances, and he was very much not meant to be king. No one thought he would be. He's more of like, wasn't taught in all the warfare stuff. He's much more of like a bard type character. And also as well, to add to all of this, Balin and Zagreus did have a previous romantic relationship that kind of fell apart when Balin decided to focus on his training as a paladin, to trying to become the prime paladin for the previous crown prince kind of thing. But yeah, the story is, you know, there's basically some rumblings about a possible like coup insurgents, and Balin and Zagreus have to kind of work together to work out what's going on, get closer, work out any secrets that are kind of hiding behind the scenes in closets as such. This was fun. I really liked the setting, I liked the vibes, I like a, you know, king and knight homoerotic situation. We've all been there. But like, a lot of this book is we're traveling from one place to another place. We have several conversations, we find something out, we then travel to another place. Sometimes we travel back to that previous place, let's not forget that. And nothing really happened for a lot of this book in a way that was kind of frustrating. So like, yeah, I am definitely interested in this world. I found out that because I got this from the library also has a couple of other of Seth Haddon's books. And another one of the books is set in the same world as this, and I'm very much interested in picking that up because we have this like rival kingdom. The siblings were murdered over the border in the rival kingdom. Are they involved in this, you know, death, etc., etc.? Like, that was all interesting, and I definitely want to learn more about, you know, that other kingdom, the relationship between them, which I think is the focus of that other book that I briefly mentioned. But in this book specifically, I was bored a lot of the time, so it was just okay. I ended up giving this 2 stars, but yeah, that's where I am at with how I feel about those books. The next book that I ended up reading was These Vanished Birds by Simon Himenez. This is another sci-fi book. This was in my attempt to read a bunch of sci-fi books this month. I have previously read a different Simon Himenez book, The Spear That Cuts Through Water, and he does some really interesting things with perspective and storytelling and how a story is told, and that's true of this book as well. This was his debut that he wrote before the other book that I mentioned. So in this one, like, the first chapter in this book is the perspective of this guy who lives like on a planet, corporation world, trading world. They produce this crop, and every 8 years this ship comes down, collects the crops, and the people in this ship do not age in those 8 years, but he obviously does, and it's his relationship with one of these characters on the ship, and then at a certain point a young boy crash lands into this world, and he looks after him up until this point that the big ship comes down, and then he goes off in that ship, and then the next character is like the captain of the ship, and it goes on from there, and we don't really ever go back to that first perspective. So yeah, like, similarly, it's not as, you know, experimental as The Spear Cuts Through Water, but it's definitely playing a lot with perspectives and points of view and how we're getting the story, and it's mainly, you know, the captain having to go pop round the kind of outer reaches of space with this young boy, because they think, you know, the corporation empire of this world thinks that this young boy might have the ability to kind of what's called jaunt, which means that he can travel through space without any time. At the moment they do have like a fast speed, like fast travel situation, but with like folded space, but like time is still passing even though it's less time than the rest of the world. And they hope that, you know, with this technology they might be able to have this like instantaneous kind of travel thing. So yeah, so it's that kind of 15 years of them bopping around space and seeing these characters grow, seeing who this like young boy turns into, etc, etc. And then at a certain point, something like absolutely gut-wrenchingly awful happens. And at that point, I became obsessed with this book because I was like, this is the only place that this story could go, and I think it's really interesting, and it has some really interesting like reflections on society and kind of capitalism and, you know, mining resources, etc, etc. I don't want to like be too specific because I think it's great. But yeah, really juicy, really good. Like, I had a great time up until that point because I love the interesting things that Simon Himenez does with his writing and his perspectives, and I was really invested in the story, which was not the case with his previous book. And then like you get this like big theme that gets uncovered, and it's a great time. I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this 5 stars. Next book that I ended up reading was Rose House by Arkady Martine. This is one of the ones that I have a copy of. This is a like little sci-fi novella where we are, you know, we've had this previous very eccentric architect, and he's designed this house called Rose House, which is a house that is an AI. So it's not a house that's like the smart house that has an AI. The house itself is an artificial intelligence, and basically following his death, there is one person who can enter this house for 7 days a year, called Dr. Celine Gizel, who is like this architect's like protege, and she's been forced into this uncomfortable position to be like bearer of this legacy of this man that she does not like. So what happens when the house contacts the local police department because someone has died in the house? Someone else has died in the house. There's now 2 dead bodies in this house. So we follow our detective, Maurizia Smith, as she wants to investigate the house, and how does she get into the house, and then what happens inside of the house, kind of thing. Things get really weird and complicated. Does anything make sense? No, not really. Does anything like get explained? Also no, but I had a great time. I picked this up and I realised that like I absolutely love Arkady Martine's writing style, which I'm not surprised by, seeing that I really enjoyed her previous 2 books. But like, this was so fun and it was great, and I love the ideas that get brought up in this, and just the writing and everything. I had a great time. This was 4 stars. The next book that I picked up was Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. This is a like YA horror book, very like plant-based, nature-based horror. And this was good, unlike my previous try at reading some like foresty horror, which I did not enjoy. So we are following our main character, Andrew, who he goes to this like private boarding school for fancy people kind of thing. And he's coming back to, it's the, you know, just after summer, he's going back to school. We know that there was something that happened at the end of his previous school year. He does not remember what's happened. Everyone is looking at him a little bit differently, and his hands are like covered in scars. And he's kind of excited and nervous to go back to school, especially because he's going to see Thomas again, who is this like his like best friend who he's has a crush on, obsessed with, etc. And at the end of the previous school year, he'd like, because Andrew like writes these like creepy, broken fairy tale type stories, and Thomas illustrates for them. And Thomas had given him a story which kind of discussed his feelings, kind of thing. So yeah, what happens when all of the creepy monsters from these stories start coming to life in the forest? And Andrew and Thomas have to kind of fight them, and things get weirder and weirder in the school, and they keep on being broached and more broached by these monsters. Andrew is so anxious, and I think that that's kind of part of why this works, because we're stuck in his head, and he's just like mulling things over and ruminating on them, and things are getting like weirder and weirder, and his anxiety is almost getting worse and worse, but not when he has to go out and fight these monsters. and he's struggling with a bunch of stuff. He's convinced that Thomas is in love with Andrew's twin sister, Dove. He's like, thinks that he might be asexual as well, and that's like a huge pain point for him, whereas everyone around him is like, it's fine. So yeah, like, juicy, like, codependent, anxiety, like, weird friendship kind of thing going on. The ending of this is very much like, oh, this is a YA horror / thriller. Okay. Wasn't as, I was really enjoying it kind of up until that point, but I think overall the writing was absolutely beautiful. It's very, like, lush and evocative and, great. I liked that the monsters were, like, real, if that makes sense. I was worried that this was going to go down because of all of his anxiety. Is no one else able to see them, but, like, they do. And yeah, just creepy, gross, great atmosphere, love the writing, etc, etc. So I did end up giving this 4 stars. I would say probably lands around a 3 to a 4, but I think the writing and the vibes and the atmosphere were just, like, great, top notch. The next book that I picked up was Heavenly Bodies by Imani Erriu. I do think it's fun that I read this whilst using my little, like, star-themed bookmark. This is, like, a fantasy romance, like, romantasy book. We're following our main character, Elara, who is, like, running from her kingdom because a star has killed her parents, caused a bunch of chaos, and she ends up getting kidnapped by the neighbouring kingdom. And when the king there basically finds out that she was able to survive the star's, like, big magical attack, is like, okay, I want you to train with my son so that we can, like, kill this star. Great. Fantastic. There is a prophecy about Elara that, like, the king of stars will fall in love with her and this will lead to both her death, hence why that star killed everyone in her family. And so she's there, she starts to make relationships and friendships with the other people in the palace. There's a little bit of a, like, tension, enemies to lovers, if you will, reluctant allies between her and the crown prince, Lorenzo or Enzo. And yeah, we learn as they learn some more about the world, work further together, kiss, fall in love. This book taught me a lot about things that I like and I don't like, I would say is the best way to put this. I initially, firstly, tried to, like, read this physically whilst also listening to the audiobook, which did not work out for me. I read too quickly. I would have had to put it on, like, 3 times speed or something, and I was just focusing on one over the other. I could not hold both of those at the same time. I just wasn't interested in continuing once I realised that was the case. I listen on my audiobooks at, like, 1.25 speed. I'm very much a, like, this is a fun, chill activity I do whilst I'm, like, doing another task. The next thing is the world building. It's definitely interesting. We're in this world where there's these, like, 12 kingdoms that are all based a little bit on the zodiac. Everyone in, depending on your kingdom, has, like, different magical powers. So Elara is from the Dark Kingdom, Asteria, so she has, like, darkness, like, shadow powers, she can dreamwalk, things like that. Obviously Enzo's from, like, Helios, the Light Kingdom, and he can, like, use light powers and fire, etc. That's all fine. My problem is that the world is so different between these kingdoms. So, like, in Asteria, the light is, like, blues and purples and it's cold, whereas you cross a border because they're next to each other into Helios and suddenly it's so much warmer and the light's, like, gold and yellow. And which is fine, this is a fantasy book. You can do things like this. But I realised that that's not my preferred type of, like, fantasy. I want a world that could theoretically work on a globe with the rules of physics in the world, I love a map, but the map has to be, like, a realistic one. So yeah, like, that was my second kind of stumbling block. There's also like, the fashion's kind of weird. We go from, again, Ilara's described as wearing like a woolen dress and a corset and a like slip underneath. Great. Thank you for having a, you know, an undergarment between underneath a corset. Points. Losing points for saying that corsets are restrictive and not the fact that they're also supportive. But then when we get to Helios, she's wearing a lot of much lighter clothing because it's a lot warmer. The only way I can describe the vibe that this clothing was to me was like 2020s TikTok milkmaid dresses, crop tops with skirts that have a slip all the way up. What is the time period for this clothes? Like, I enjoy fashion in books. I enjoy fashion in books, especially when there's a bit more of a historical lean to my fantasies. That's something that I have an interest in. I have an interest in historical fashion and stuff. I like a historical bent to my fantasies, and that is included in the kind of clothing question. It's why I bumped off Fourth Wing so aggressively with all of the like leather in her outfit. Like, it's a nitpick that I have. There's also like weird, at a certain point a character, they go to a different kingdom, there's a food there that is very clearly a pizza. Are you Italian? Like Lorenzo as well. Weird little details that trip me up. But yeah, I think the last thing that I realized is that this was absolutely fine. I have no issues with, like, I think the writing was good, I think the story was interesting, etc, etc. It relied very much on, like, straight fantasy romance tropes, which is fine. That is who this is written for, and that's your audience. And what I realized is that I do not care about it. If this was the same writing, the same kind of story, but it was more, you know, using some gay fantasy romance tropes, I eat that shit up all the time. But because this is straight, I realize that I have much less tolerance for these kind of tropes and things like that. So I think it's great. I think it's a very decent, good book. I just did not care as much because of the fact that this is a straight romance story, and it depends on a lot of those tropes to make it a straight romance story. Definitely interested in seeing how this story develops. I think we are left off at the end of this book in quite an interesting place. None of it was surprising, but still interesting. Very, you know, in what we kind of do next. But yeah, I ended up giving this 3 stars. Had a good time with it. The next book that I ended up reading was Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. This is, I'm back on my sci-fi bullshit. It's a little sci-fi book. We're following our main character, Cora. She is like, this is set in like, I don't know, like 2004, 2009? Cannot remember. You know, it's historically. But like in a very specific time period. She is the like eldest sister in her family. She is the daughter of someone called Niels Ortega, who is kind of like an Edward Snowden type character, who released this information that there was possible like first contact with aliens, and is this like big like the truth is a human right kind of thing. And we get excerpts from his blog or like things connected to this like throughout the story. And this story basically starts with Cora, you know, going to work, and something like a big meteorite crashes into the outskirts of like Los Angeles basically. And this is a month after the previous one of these events has happened. Which is the point that Niels released that information, and they're like, oh, these like, you know, so this is public perception of, are these like huge meteorite strikes normal, natural, or are they related to alien activity? And things get a little bit more complicated from there. She ends up becoming kind of first contact with this alien species, and there is no real way that they can communicate apart from Cora being like tagged by this alien and having a little machine put into her ear so that he can communicate with her. And it's little bit of a romp from there. How do we, what's kind of going on? Why are these aliens here? How does First Contact kind of work? It's very much one of those stories. There's a lot of things happening like that. This also had that same problem that I did have with Hammajang Look, where there is a section, I wouldn't say 3/4 of the way through this book, but thereabouts, where we get this like revelation, and it's like, Cora, girl, how did you not think of this? Why were you only blaming this thing on the government? I think that's a little bit insane. You are being very trusting of a lot of people involved. But like, in Cora's defense, she was kidnapped and, taken by this alien and was forced to do various things until she was able to make like a deal with him, and then they were taken in by the military. So I understand why she's not put the pieces together up until this point. I'm much more forgiving of Cora in this situation than I am Edie. Going to be so for real. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed, like, basically a lot of this character, a lot of this book is Cora and this alien trying to, like, find out more about each other and how, like, they butt heads because we are fundamentally, like, different species that have different ethics and things like that, but how you can still communicate and, things like that. Also, big alien fights. This was great. I had a really fun time with this. Just straight up a good time. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The last book that I read this month, as in I literally finished it this morning, was The Tyrant by Seth Dickinson. This is the 3rd book in the Masquerade series, in which we are following our main character, Erriu. She grows up on this island called Tyrant that, like, slowly there is this big empire, the Reforged Empire, who slowly kind of come in and kind of systemically break down her civilization, destroy trade routes, make their currency kind of unusable, etc., etc., bring diseases, and then only vaccinate the people that they can train, kind of thing. So Erriu ends up going into a full crazy school and learning kind of how to be a perfect citizen, and she gets this modicum of power to go to a place called Arduin in the 1st book and be an accountant there, and kind of sets up for like this revolution, this like very dense political plot to try and gain herself more power within the empire. That's then kind of continued in the 2nd book, where she's playing with a lot more players on the board in the 2nd book. She knows a lot more about the other people who are in this similar position of power, kind of underneath the emperor. And there's a lot of traveling to various places and kind of making deals and kind of little power plays and things like that. In this 3rd book, it's insane. Firstly, this is a tome. This is 760 pages. This is like twice the size of the 1st book in this series. There's so much that happens in this. We spend a lot of the time of this book on ships, in the middle of oceans or near islands. We're having to deal with, new populations. Something that's going on with Erriu is that at a certain point, I think in the 1st book, she suffers this injury and basically she can no longer see, I think, the right-hand side of her. She can't see, like, out of her eye. She can't, see that part of her body. She forgets that it exists. She has this, like, neglect. And we learn a bit more about, like, what's going on there and kind of what's going on. And she realizes that she has her big plan to try and take down the empire. And so it's her trying to work with the other people that have her similar kind of position of power, how they're going to undermine also the people kind of on top of them. She also gets very caught up in, like, a lot of relationships between people, including her, outside of her. Yeah, it's great. Every time I talk about these books, I'm like, I love dense political fantasies, and it remains true. There's some things in this that are such, like, crunchy and juicy, and it's fantastic how they play out. I had such a great time reading this. It's got everything you want. Slow passages where it's just like a bunch of politics stuff happening, action, tension, weird medical procedures. What more could you ask? Yeah, I had a great time. I did get to the end of this book and realise that there's meant to be a fourth book in this series, but seeing that this was released in 2020 and there is no fourth book, I am having a bit of one of those, oh my god, I'm never gonna get this book again, kind of situations. But like, I really enjoyed this book. I think that this series is so good as well. It's such a great time. The writing's really good. I just love the complexities that are written into these books, because it's a story about empire and colonization and conquest, and everything's really difficult. And like, even though like Burroughs is this really kind of clever person, it's still kind of in limbo. Will she be able to pull this off, kind of thing? Is she going to still be swayed and just enjoy this position of power too much, kind of thing? Great. I loved it. I'm gonna give this 5 stars. I think it was just so good. I think I've basically given the other 2 books in this series 4 stars. I do think that the second book suffered from me leaving like 18 months between these books, between like the first and second book. So the fact that I picked this up like a month or 2 after I read the second book really did help, because there's so much going on in these books. But like, yeah, it was a great time. If you're the people in my house are unfortunately having to hear me talk about this. I was complaining the entire time about it being at home, but I also had the best time reading it. So yeah, 5 stars for that. In terms of kind of what's next, I have started Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, just like as a little cleanser between book 1 and book 2 of the Lindsay Ellis books. That's the one I'm going to read after that. I have a copy of Ascension by S.D. Gibson from the library that I'm probably going to read, as well as A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, which I'm going to be picking up soon. So that's like immediate plans, and then it will be kind of whatever comes up on my library, basically, as it is most months in this house. But yeah, that's everything that I read this past month. I hope that you've also been reading some fun books. Bye!